So a paradigm shift is also a really important idea in Kuhn. And Kuhn said, when a paradigm in the uppercase sense faces puzzles that it can't solve, space to propose a new paradigm in the narrow sense opens up. And if that new paradigm solves these puzzles in a compelling way, it can generate its own consensus, producing a new paradigm, a kind of competing paradigm that other people will rally around and try to build a consensus around. And this is what Kuhn called revolutionary science. Revolutionary science is when a new paradigm emerges around which a new consensus starts to build, and you have competing paradigms. Kuhn's example was the Copernican Revolution. So there were a number of well-known puzzles that the Aristotelian paradigm didn't seem to do well with. One of them was retrograde motions, when you observe the planets supposedly orbiting around the Earth. Occasionally it looks like some of them move backwards, and people were dissatisfied with the explanation that the Aristotelian paradigm gave for that. And this created an opening for a new paradigm, namely the sun-centered paradigm of Copernicus. Copernicus gave a novel and compelling explanation of retrograde motion. And people got excited. They started using the Copernican paradigm to solve other puzzles. A consensus gradually built, and you get a scientific revolution eventually where the new paradigm replaces an old one. Okay, and so as you know, here's the alternative. Copernican paradigm puts the sun at the center of things and is much closer to the view of the solar system that we now have. So what changes in a paradigm shift? So this is very important. Sometimes people talk about Kuhn's theory as if he was some kind of radical skeptic idealist, and you see a totally different world when you go through a paradigm shift. So it's like you see one world in one paradigm, and then there's a paradigm shift, and now you see a totally different world. That's not what Kuhn is saying. He's not saying that the world you see is different. He's saying the way you interpret what you see is different. And that's a big difference. So this is his idea of theory-laden observation. This is the idea that what we say about what we see is influenced by our working theoretical assumptions. So it's not saying that we see the world differently necessarily, but rather that the way we interpret what we see is different. So the classic way of explaining this is the duck rabbit. Is this a duck or is it a rabbit? Well, if it's looking to the right, it looks like a rabbit. But if you take it as if it's looking to the left, then it looks like a duck. And the point that I'm making here is that whether you're seeing it as a rabbit or whether you're seeing it as a duck, you're still looking at the same image. So the image itself doesn't change. And so that's why Kuhn isn't sort of this radical idealist skeptic where you produce out of your mind an entirely new world when you take up a different paradigm. That's not what he's saying. The world is still there in the way that it was before. You're just interpreting it differently. So the image before you is there in the same way, whether you're seeing it as a duck or as a rabbit. It's just you are interpreting it differently. Okay, so what's this? Is this a duck chat or a rabbit spat? It can be two ducks sort of talking to each other over that line, or it can be two rabbits who just had a lover's quarrel and they're not talking to each other anymore. But the point is, the thing before you doesn't change. The way you see it is what changes. So you could see a duck.